This is Chapter 10, Part 2, and on the second part we're going to focus more on the number side of the buying process and look at what else goes into the buying process.
Look at the preparing the open to buy, and after the merchandise assortment is planned, the buyer is ready to prepare the open to buy. And the open to buy is the buyer's budget, and it dictates how much the buyer can spend in each merchandise classification for each month. And it's calculated in retail dollars and is based on the 6-month plan. And it's the difference between how much the buyer has in inventory to reach sales goals less the merchandise that is currently available or on hand, which also includes on order items. So the different parts of the open to buy, first is the on order, and these are orders placed with suppliers that have not yet been received and are logged in a purchase journal. So they're considered part of the on-hand stock. And next is the purchase journal, and it's a spreadsheet used to keep track of all the orders that have been placed. Also, you have on-hand stock, and this is the actual merchandise that's in the store. And you also have the liquid open to buy, and this is unspent funds that allow items to be bought to update inventory and replenish items that have not sold out. And it's important to have this available at all times. And most vendors add a few new items to their lines after a collection is introduced, so it's important to have some liquid open to buy, because if these lines are doing well in your store, then you can go in and buy additional items to add to that line to sell in your store mid-season. And the open to buy is a fluctuating figure because sales are changing and should be updated mid-month to determine how much money is available. And you can look at the formulas for open to buy in your textbook. You will not have to use these formulas anywhere really, because it's all generated in the financial planning sheets that you use in Excel for you. But it's good to kind of know what goes into it and what it's based off of.
Now we'll look at markdowns, and markdowns are done by the buyer, and they are the amount deducted from the cost of the product to determine the sale price. And they are a fact in the fashion retail business because merchandise is seasonal. It's going to have to be marked down and gotten rid of. And buyers plan markdowns by determining the dollar amount of inventory that will be allocated to the markdowns, when they will happen, and how much they will be marked down. Some reasons for markdowns are items are out of season due to perishability of fashion goods. So kind of like I just mentioned, fashion merchandise is in essence perishable goods and have a short window that they are in season. Another reason for markdowns could be buyer error, and this would be if the buyer bought too many of a style or the wrong color or too much of a certain color. It could also be if items weren't received when they needed to be received. So they're received either too early in the season, the buyer brought them in too soon in the season, or too late in the season. Or it could be because buyer error could be because new vendors don't sell well that they purchased from, or merchandise is not merchandised well in the store or not advertised or promoted well, and that could also be a buyer error because the buyer is supposed to help with those things as well. Another reason for markdowns could be external factors such as adverse weather conditions. They affect seasonal sales. So say your hot winter will kill your outerwear sales in the fall and the winter, because say it stays really warm until December, well then you don't have a very short amount of time that you'll even really need a jacket. Also, the poor economy can affect fashion goods and make them not a priority over just basic staples that people need. Also, another reason for markdowns can be fit or quality. So just if the items were maybe of poor quality, or if they don't fit well, or they're not true to size, so a 2 is really a 0, that can cause items not to sell and need to be marked down. Also, customer disinterest or dislike in the item. Also, it can be because sales associates don't promote an item. Or price. The selling price could not be competitive with the market, and so it's priced too high. That would be another reason for a markdown. Or it's oversaturated. You bought something that you can get anywhere. There's no niche part to this item, so it could be another reason for a markdown. This slide shows a buyer's timing calendar, and when a new line is purchased, the buyer will usually clear out their prior seasons with markdowns. And fashion merchandise is cyclical in that it becomes unfashionable with the changing seasons and trends. And this specific timing calendar is shown in your book. It's figure 10.10. And it shows the impact of fashion seasons on the introduction and the clearance of merchandise lines. So if you look at the slide, you can see that their calendar starts with February, and it shows A is when they're bringing in or receiving new merchandise. B shows when major fashion promotions before this point should happen before that point, before B. So you want to have all your big promotions before you get to B. And then C is where you can't reorder any of those items. And then D is when markdowns begin. So they get items in February, and so by the time that you get to almost April, they're already marking them down and clearancing them out and getting rid of them. And then they're introducing new merchandise in April. So it just kind of shows you how they go about their calendar. And in this calendar, I think when I looked at it, they introduce new items 7 times throughout the year. And markdowns are based on the rate of the sale, and the amount of time the items sell at full price is determined, and then markdowns are determined. And most high-end retailers use semi-annual sales, so they only do markdowns at the end of a season twice a year. So they do once after Christmas and once after June. While other retailers use a perpetual markdown policy where they reduce the price on items every month, and this allows to sell items earlier than planned and many times at a higher markup because they slowly reduce the price each month. So an example of this would be at 30 days, you would mark down everything 20%. Then at 60 days, you would mark everything down 40%. However, perpetual markdown policy may not be the best for you because sometimes there are markdown exceptions where certain items that are popular don't need to be marked down that quickly or marked down at all. So it's kind of best to use a system in between the two of those. Next, the buyer also has to determine the markup, and this is the amount added to the cost of the product to establish the selling price. And the amount of the markup is determined by the type of merchandise, the services provided. Remember, we talked about the price would be higher the more services you offer. How often the product sells. Remember, we said if you're going to sell it a ton, you'll have a lower price. And the amount of profit the buyer wants to make. And markup can be expressed in dollars or percentage of cost or selling price, but it is usually a percentage of the retail price. And a number of costs are associated with adding markup to the price of merchandise. So first is your operating cost, and this is the day-to-day expenses incurred in running a business, such as your rent and utilities. You also have incidental costs, and this are costs that occur sporadically throughout the year, such as shipping charges, or say when you have to get all new light bulbs throughout the store, things like that. And markup can be done using 3 types of markup calculations. First, you have your initial markup, and this is the first markup calculation on the wholesale price or cost of the item to generate the retail or the selling price. And for initial markup is calculated on cost, and it takes the cost of the goods. So for an example, if a dress costs $40, you want to mark it up to the retail price of $80. So you would take your $40 and your markup price. So you take your $40, the cost of the item, and then the $80, the markup price, and divide those 40 by 80, and that gives you a 50% markup. And when determining the initial markup, you need to use the forecasted sales, expenses, planned markdowns, and expected profits into consideration to determine what your initial markup needs to be. And for an example of how to do this, look on page 233, and this is where they add together profits, expenses, and markdowns and divide that by the sales plus reductions to determine your markup percentage. and it gives you a markup percentage to use. You can also do maintain markup, and this is the final markup calculation at which the item is sold. So it's the markup you made once the item sold at the price. So the other one was our initial markup, so that's the markup at the very beginning when you put it on the floor. Maintain markup is what you actually sold your item for. So for example, if we took our dress again, that was $80, and then we sold it at $60. So if you take 80 minus 60, you get 20. And if you take 20 and divide it by 60, the price that you sold it for, you would get a 33% markup. So initially on our dress, our initial markup was at 50, and then our maintain markup, what we sold it at, was 33%. And the last type of markup is a flexible markup policy, and this is where you markup. The retailer is offering an array of merchandise. They'll usually use a flexible markup policy, and this is where you mark up different subcategories or classifications at different markups than you do other items. So for example, if you have accessories, you might want to mark up your accessories more than you mark up your clothing. So looking at some pricing strategies that retailers use, there's a number of different pricing strategies that relate to the markdown and the markup of fashion merchandise. One is introductory pricing, and it's setting prices lower than the industry average markup to gain entry into a market. And price skimming is setting a high initial price and then gradually lowering your price. Price lining or all-in-one pricing is grouping inventory into categories and then setting the same price for all items in a category. And this results in a below average market for some items and an above average market for others. So an example of this would be if you said all t-shirts are $5.99. And this is used to strengthen advertising efforts to try to get people in the store. And another pricing strategy is a loss leader, and this is when one or more items are sold at or below cost and advertised in order to attract customers in the store and has little or no markup. And this is done because they think that once the customer will get in the store that they'll buy more than just the loss leader once they're there. And usually a loss leader, I would say, is not marked below cost, but is usually at cost. And this is something that JCPenney did all the time in things that they would run in their ads. They would run a shirt for really cheap to get people in the store, and they would have sales on other merchandise that had a much higher markup. Some other pricing policies are the business will match competitor prices. They'll allow you to use coupons, or they'll let you return sales merchandise, would be under pricing strategies. Also, employee discounts would fall under your pricing policies and pricing strategies, and allowing employee discounts on clearance items would be another policy. Now the buyer must help the marketing and selling of the merchandise once they have bought it and priced it. And they do this by conveying the reasons for merchandise selection to the sales associates, and in doing so, they increase the profitability of retail sales, and sales personnel have the information and the confidence needed to sell the merchandise to the customer. So once again, how we talked about communication, this is where the buyer has to communicate to the sales associate about their products and why they're good products and why they should sell, and what things they should highlight or talk about to the customer about the product. Visual merchandising is also another important aspect that the buyer deals with, and visual merchandising is very important to retail sales, and the buyer needs to help in selecting the items to be highlighted in interior displays, window displays, signage, or a combination. And this is because the buyer knows what items will create customer traffic, or they also may want to feature items that they have a large quantity of. So cooperation between the visual merchandiser and the buyer can generate sales, can enhance the retailer's image, and can encourage repeat business. The buyer also needs to be involved in the sales promotions, and the buyer wants to promote a key item, they'll usually advertise it. Therefore, the buyer works with the sales promotion staff to make sure that the product is shown in the best light and in a way that will make it desirable to the target customer. And some ways that they help promote the product is in advertising, sales promotions. They could do publicity with them, special events, or fashion and trunk shows would be another way to help promote their products. So as you can see, the buyer is involved in many different aspects within the retail selling process, and it's more than just picking out the clothing. And the buyer also needs to help with the supporting services, because with the buyer's input, orders will be entered and processed through the accounting department. They'll also work with the inventory counts and determine if they're annual or more frequent, and they're usually under the buyer's responsibility. They also will be over the merchandise that's received, ticketed, and moved to the sales floor. And they want to make sure that it's done, that they received everything that they were supposed to, that it's ticketed at the correct price, and then it's moved to the sale floor where they want it to be. So a buyer's goal is to select merchandise that sells at retail and generates a profit. There are a number of merchandising calculations that enable buyers to monitor their profitability. So one is stock turn, and that's also referred to as turnover. And this is the statistical measurement that is formed as a simple fraction in which the sales for a given period is divided by the average amount of stock during that same period, and both are measured in retail sales. So it's a measurement of inventory performance, and it helps determine inventory productivity. And stock turn varies, but for a boutique, it would need to be about 4 times for a 12-month period. Another important calculation to look at is the stock to sales ratio, and it's a calculation of the inventory for a given period of time divided by the sales volume for the same period. So for example, if your inventory is $150,000 and you divided that by sales of $50,000, the ratio is 3. But you need to take into account 12 months, so you would take 12 months divided by the 3 that you came up with, which gives you a ratio of 4. So your stock to sales ratio would be 4. And this lets you know if your stock turn goal is within reach. So we said our stock turnover goal was 4 and our stock to sales ratio is 4, so that means that we're on track to reach our goal. And stock turn, markup, markdowns, and inventory shortages are all critical factors in the buyer's quest for profitability. And our last slide looks at buying for non-store retail operations, which would either be catalog operations, television networks, or internet retailing. And the big thing about them is they don't have a physical environment through which customers can see, touch, or try the merchandise, or get a feel for the business, its ambiance, or personality through a store. And the buyer often serves a global clientele and a broader market because of the wide reach of non-store operations. Therefore, the merchandise selection must appeal to consumers in varying climates and geographic areas. Also, value pricing and exclusivity are 2 things online buyers need to focus on. And also, timing is a primary factor, and many buyers will place backup orders because you can't be out of stock online and in catalogs. And sometimes catalog merchandise needs to be around for 3 to 6 months. So you also need a wide range of sizes and colors on hand. And also, visual presentation is very important with online, catalog, and television because they aren't going to get to see and touch it. And this concludes Chapter 10.